So, for the first of a few friendly greetings, I would like to welcome you to this convocation that is opening the spring semester of the 1920 academic school year. I welcome each and every one of you. We are so glad that you're able to continue to be a part of our community. We hope that the semester will be one that is filled with joy, that will be one that will expand your mind and imagination in ways that you could have hitherto not thought possible. We ask that you will find yourselves deeply invested in this place, this mission, and each other, because indeed we are on the journey to be who God needs for us to be in this time, in this place. So I officially welcome you to our opening convocation and to this semester.
Good afternoon, everybody. And on behalf of the Chicago Theological Seminary's Board of Trustees, and in the name of the presence that you pray to and speak with, I say greetings and thank you for having me, and look forward to today's convocation. Anti-convocation.
Here are our anti-academic notices. After 2 faculty searches, the board has approved the appointment of Dr. Lakeisha Lockhart as Assistant Professor of Practical Theology, and Dr. Jose Morales as Assistant Professor of Latinx Studies and Religion. After targeted After a targeted faculty search, Dr. Najiba Saeed will join CTS as Associate Professor of Muslim and InterReligious Studies. All 3 will begin their term at CTS on July 1st. So join me in welcoming our new faculty members. CTS has a new registrar, Reverend Tina Shelton, who comes to us with over 5 years of theological education and registration experience. Justin Kim is now our online learning consultant, and there will be a new DOL search, and with the idea of having a person in place also by July 1. We're looking forward to the second Kenneth B. Smith lecture in a couple of weeks, February the 27th. It will feature Bandy, Professor of Homiletics, and AME historiographer, the Reverend Dr. Teresa Fry Brown. Dr. Uzma Jamil will give the IRI keynote on March 17th during the Bayan Intensive. Look for information also about the open house lectures featuring PhD students, Zachary Selby and Will Andrews. And of course, registration is coming, and we're preparing for summer 2020 and 2020-2021 courses. Amen and ashe. We are delighted to welcome students, faculty, and our constituents back, all who participated in our Israel-Palestine study tour. The group was led by Dr. Zachary Moon, Rami Nashashibi, and today's anti-convocation speaker, Rabbi Dr. Rachel Mikva. She is the Rabbi Herman E. Schaalman Chair and Associate Professor of Jewish Studies and Senior Faculty of the IRI Institute. She has a bachelor's from Stanford University, an MA in Rabbinic Ordination from Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion, and a PhD from Jewish Theological Seminary. Professor Mikva served as a congregational rabbi for 13 years before returning to academia. Her works include Midrash Vayosha, a medieval midrash on the Song at Sea. She's editor of Broken Tablets, Restoring the 10 Commandments and Ourselves. We wait with anti-anticipation as Dr. Mikva addresses the topic. Does theological education matter if the world is coming to an end? We welcome all who are gathered here online and in person. We welcome all who've responded to the call to gather together, to come together, to celebrate together.
So in the spirit of anti-convocation, we wanted to just create a spiritual experience together
We'll learn more about the Tu B'Shvat and the Tu B'Shvat Seder, but I would like you all to lead this with me. So I'm just going to walk around with the mic, and when I come to you and offer you a mic, if you will, just read what's up on the screen, and if you'd rather not, just touch my hand and I'll move the mic along. Does that sound like a deal? Okay. Can we start here?
Tu B'Shvat is a Jewish holiday named after its date, the 15th day of the month of Shavat, like the 4th of July. Tu B'Shvat is one of the 4 new years mentioned in the Mishnah. It is the new year of the trees. In antiquity, it was important to know when the tree was of the age that you would need to tithe its fruit, returning part of the bounty to God, giving it to the priests and the poor, and when it was old enough to harvest its fruit.
In the wake of exile, the date's significance waned. Tu B'Shvat remained dormant like a tree in winter. Since Judaism is a meaning-seeking tradition, however, it bloomed again in later generations. In the 16th century, in Safed, the kabbalists believed that all ritual and moral actions we take in this world have an impact on the worlds beyond. They fashioned a seder for Tu B'Shvat that illuminated our human connectivity to the divine and to all creation.
So I want this word not to be hard, so let's all practice it. This is the name of the holiday, and you're all doing fine, but let's just all practice it. It's Tu B'Shvat. Tu B'Shvat. Tu is the date made out of Hebrew letters, the 15th. B in Shvat. Tu B'Shvat. You're all such quick studies. You know, you ought to go to graduate school or something. So now we're going to find out about what the kabbalists, these medieval Jewish mystics, did regarding Tu B'Shvat.
The Kabbalists pictured the flow of life and energy from God as coming through 10 sephirot of the divine tree, a tree of life, the same name the sages of antiquity gave to Torah. This divine tree of life is inverted. Its roots are in the heavens, invisible, inexplicable, unknowable. Yet its branches stretch down toward us, bringing the flow of God's energy, which creates shapes and gives life to our world.
So you can see, it took me a long time to make this, the upside-down tree, and floating over it are the sefirot, these 10 emanations of the divine, each with its own quality that the mystics imagined flow forth from God, giving light, shape, energy, and life to the universe.
The mystics also taught that created in the image of God, humanity can reflect in smaller ways these divine attributes. Through our actions, our feelings, our thoughts, and our spirits, we too impact the universe.
In the 20th century, Tu Shabbat became a sort of Jewish Earth Day. At the culmination of creation, the Holy One led the human creature through the Garden of Eden and said, "Enjoy the beauty and glory of the universe. Take heed not to corrupt or destroy my world. For if you corrupt it, there is no one to make it right after you."
As we grapple with the impact of human beings, you can do this with me. As we
grapple with the impact of human beings on the planet in this Anthropocene age, we try to envision ourselves as partners in healing the natural world.
So not all Jews know about or celebrate this Tu B'Shvat Seder. It really was the mystics who did it, and it's gotten some popularity more recently, partly because of its connectedness to the earth. So given its profound link to my talk and the fact that Tu B'Shvat, as the actual holiday, was just Monday night and yesterday, I wanted to share this lovely, thoughtful, spiritual ritual with you. The Seder is split into 4 sections. Each represents a sphere within the Kabbalah, a way in which the divine emanates into the world. And it's important to note that we also impact the world in some of these same ways: action, formation, thought, and spirit, which in this chart is rendered as physical, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual. And it also maps other 4s, other significant 4s onto this chart: the 4 seasons, the 4 elements, and these are represented and embodied in the fruits and drink that we'll consume during the Seder. So this first cup, what I'd like you to do is to take a cup on your table and pour the lightest carafe of wine, the one that is, pour into your cup as much as you'll actually drink, because we want it to be empty when we get to the second cup. So if you're only going to take a sip, pour a sip. And it's not wine, it's juice, because I didn't want to compromise the entire remainder of our productive day. So the first cup we drink at Tu B'Shvat Seder is white wine or juice. And like the winter months, it lacks the riotous colors of creation. Yet we know that such life lies buried only a small distance beneath the surface. And if we can stop doing, remember this first stage of the Seder is about asiyah, about action. If we can stop doing long enough to see, we'll recognize these divine sparks ready to emerge. And here's the traditional blessing when we consume juice or wine. If you know it, you can join me. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen. Blessed are you, eternal God, sovereign of time and space, creator of the fruit of the vine. And now you get to drink it. So I think I need a cup. Thank you. If you run out of food or, yeah? No, I kind of need to know when it needs to go. I just need 3 hands. And I'm going to get rid of the mic. I'm going to give it over to Trevor.
Although seemingly inedible from the outside, each of the foods eaten at the level of asaya, when peeled or shelled, holds gifts that transcend its outward appearance. Because of their hard exterior, these foods can represent the human tendency to judge others by their outward appearance, failing to recognize their gifts hidden within. These foods also represent the ways we separate ourselves from the natural world. People tend to spend a lot of time in the world of asiyah. We do stuff. Too busy to recognize our kinship with all of creation, we shield ourselves from the consequences of our actions.
So, can you identify on your table the food that we're going to shortly eat and one of your choice, right? They need to be not edible on the outside, but edible on the inside.
I can share. Anyone want to share with me?
Bananas or lemon?
I think it's the natural encasing.
Can I just have like a slice of someone's content?
Yeah. I'm happy to share.
So we're going to have 2 blessings here. The first one praises God for creating this. I mean, imagine you plant a seed and then that grows. You plant a seed and fruit grows. So we want to thank God or the divine for the gifts. But then there's another one, a second blessing. So don't eat it after the first blessing. Cantor David Berger is going to lead us in the second blessing before we. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri ha'etz. Blessed are you, eternal God, sovereign of time and space, creator of fruit of the trees. And then there's a blessing when you come to a special moment, something you haven't done before or in a long time, something where you want to mark that you've entered a moment of gratitude. We sing Shehachianu, thanking God that we got there. Section of your coming time? Thank you. And that's about how long the people on the study tour had to eat a whole meal. I'm afraid that's true. While you're eating, Lisa will read us a poem.
Trees by Joyce Kilmer. I think that I shall never see a poem lovely as a tree whose hungry mouth is pressed against the earth's sweet flowing breast, a tree that looks at God all day and lifts her leafy arms to pray, a tree that may in summer wear a nest of robins in her hair, upon whose bosom snow has lain, who intimately lives with rain. Poems are made by fools like me, but only God can make a tree.
I really do need 3 hands. We come to the second cup, the world of Yetzirah, of formation. So you can pour from the second carafe, the one that has just a bit of more color to it, into your cup. Normally we'd do blessings over each cup, but we're going to expedite this a little bit. And Cass, would you?
We now drink our second cup, just as each new stream begins with a trickle, just as spring is launched with the first buds, just a few drops of color transform the hue of our fruit of the vine.
I need the second one. Mm-hmm. And with the second cup comes a second fruit. Oh, can I interrupt your drinking long enough to?
In the world of Yetzirah, formation, our emotions reveal our vulnerabilities. We let the outside world touch us, sometimes even consume us. And yet at the center, we have a resilient core. Although we may discard the pits of these fruits, today they are the seeds, the means to rebirth.
So now, the treasure hunt, find in your basket or on your tray or in your bowls things that are edible on the outside but have a resilient core at the center. What are they? There are only two. If you don't have enough on your table, we can spread them around. They are dates, right? And plums. Those are the only two fruits that qualify. Do you want to join at table, or you're comfortable there? You like those seats. I like those seats too. And as we eat these fruits, or at least parts of them, we try to feel, right, open our outside and feel the cry of creation for the violence that we wreak upon it, the violence that ultimately we are also wreaking upon ourselves.
I thank you, God, for this most amazing day, for the leaping greenly spirits of trees and a blue true dream of sky, and for everything which is natural, which is infinite, which is yes. I who have died am alive again today, and this is the sun's birthday. This is the birthday of life and of love and wings, and of the gay great happening, illimitably earth. How should tasting, touching, hearing, seeing, breathing, any, lifted from the know of all nothing, human merely being, doubt unimaginable you? Now the ears of my ears awake, and now the eyes of my eyes are opened.
And we come somewhat expeditiously to the third cup, the world of Bria, where we create intellectually. It's a very good year for the red.
We drink our third cup, an even mix of dark and light. In Genesis, we read that God spoke and the world came to be. This is the process of Bria, creation through the power of thought.
And there is, of course, a third fruit.
In the world of Bria, we recognize with the power of thought our connectedness to all creation. As Ibn Kespi, a medieval Jewish Torah commentator, taught, we should be ever cognizant of the fact that we are of the same stuff as the ass and mule, the cabbage and the pomegranate, and even the lifeless stone. Our oneness laid bare, the foods we eat are edible inside and out.
Treasure hunt time. Find in your basket those things that can be completely eaten. There might be grapes. There might be raisins, which are just old grapes. No, just... And there also might be figs. If you want to try something that maybe you haven't eaten in a while, which Tu B'Shvat always encourages you to do, figs can also be completely eaten. And once you've found your fruit, take a look up top at the screen and see something that I always find really amazing. These are things inside us. What do they look like? Trees and roots, right? With the power of thought and a little bit of scientific magnification, the motor of imagination, we can see how our bodies are enmeshed in the fabric of creation. We look closely and we see these patterns revealed inside us. We are the trees, be the tree. And so as we eat the third fruit, we try to envision how to live into that connectedness, right? How to develop the political will, the technological innovation, the personal transformation that is required for us to address our climate crisis and live as one with the created universe.
The whole world of humans, animals, fish, and birds all depends on one another. All drink the earth water, breathe the earth air, and find food in what was created on the earth. All share the same destiny. What happens to one happens to all.
There is a fourth cup, the world of Atzilut, emanation.
We drink our fourth cup, evoking the rich colors of fall. It has a few drops of winter, white, anticipating the ongoing cycle of seasons. In the pattern of elements mapped onto the seder, earth, water, air, and fire, this cup represents the power of fire to radiate its heat and light.
In the spiritual realm, though, we do not consume. Some people add a spice like cinnamon to the seder so that the emanation of its scent helps us imagine the power of the spirit. But we're going to focus instead on breath as our expression of the spirit, our neshama. So we breathe in, if you think about this, we breathe in what the trees breathe out. And so it goes in a cycle. We breathe each other into existence. So I'm not going to tell you how to breathe, but I invite you to close your eyes and breathe deeply and imagine yourselves breathing each other into creation, into existence. Did I ask you to read already?
Master of the universe, grant me the ability to be alone. May it be my custom to go outdoors each day among the trees and grass, among all growing things, and there may I be alone and enter into prayer, to talk with the one to whom I belong. May I express there everything in my heart, and may all the foliage of the field, all grasses, trees, and plants awake at my coming, to send the powers of their life into the words of my prayer, so that my prayer and speech are made whole through the life and spirit of all growing things, which are made as one by their transcendent source.
I'm going to take that lovely spirit created by Tu B'Shvat and break it. So I teach a course. Is this coming across in the mic? I know I can fill the room, but I need the stream to pick it up too. Let's try. I don't want to have 3 hands again. Maybe like this. How about now? Yes? Okay. So I teach a course. Let me also watch the time. Okay, we're good. I teach a course. Some of you have taken it. It investigates structures of power, privilege, and oppression as they relate to race, class, gender, religion, sexuality, the environment, and the ways that intersectionality connects them all. Because the course is constructed around the CTS Statement of Commitments, it's called Living into Our Commitments and Effecting Social Change. This is not an abstract study for our community. Each of these structures negatively affects some portion of our students directly. And at some point in the semester, most of the students in the course experience despair, real despair. These problems seem intractable. Often it comes in a week that we devote to studying the climate crisis. Students turn from these fiery activists ready to take on all those other problems in the world into this guy from the EPA on the newsroom, if any of you were newsroom fans.
Okay. Tell us about the findings in the report that was just released.
The latest measurements taken at Mauna Loa in Hawaii indicate a CO2 level of 400 parts per million.
Just so we know what we're talking about, if you were a doctor and we were the patient, what's your prognosis? 1,000 years, 2,000 years?
A person has already been born who will die due to catastrophic failure of the planet.
What did he just say?
Okay, can you expand on that?
Sure. The last time there was this much CO2 in the air, the oceans were 80 feet higher than they are now. 2 things you should know. Half the world's population lives within 120 miles of an ocean.
And the other?
Humans can't breathe underwater.
You're saying the situation's dire.
Not exactly. Your house is burning to the ground, the situation's dire. Your house has already burned to the ground. The situation's over.
So what can we do to reverse this?
Well, there's a lot we could do.
Good.
If it were 20 years ago or even 10 years ago, but now, no.
Can you make an analogy that might help us understand?
Sure. It's as if you're sitting in your car, in your garage, and that's it.
What if someone comes and opens the door?
You're already dead.
What if the person got there in time?
You'd be saved.
Okay. So now what?
You get the gist of it. A little further on, he asks, are you going to get in trouble for saying this? And he says, who cares? So it calls into question the value of working on any of the rest of the human equation if the world as we know it might come to an end. Already we are seeing or experiencing increasing wildfires, rising seas, collapsing glaciers, increasingly ferocious weather patterns, vanishing forests and species, growing areas of food and water insecurity, climate refugees, and we know that it's going to get worse. So recently scholars have tried to name this phenomenon. And I can't seem to get my thing to advance. There we go. Climate depression, ecological grief, solastalgia. The American Psychological Association issued a report acknowledging that gradual long-term changes in the climate can surface a number of different emotions, including fear, anger, feelings of powerlessness, exhaustion. A recent Yale study learned that 69% of Americans are very or somewhat concerned about the climate. And it should come as no surprise that the percentages are higher among young people, with less of a difference between political progressives and conservatives, because these are the folks that are going to be around to feel the impact. Young people like the 21 plaintiffs in the Juliana case, They are suing the US government for denying their rights to life, liberty, and property through its actions that cause climate change. Or Cindy Chung, who's a high school senior from New Jersey, who is quoted as saying, "It wasn't our choice to be born into a doomed world. All this terrible stuff they're talking about can happen by 2030, and I won't even be 30 years old. It's so frightening." Or 16-year-old climate activist Greta Thunberg, who scolded UN officials for not being mature enough to tell it like it is. Even that burden you leave to us children. Now, normally, I like to think that there's an expiration date for blaming parents. But these students know that we've mortgaged their future for the comfort of our lifestyle, surrendering to the great carbon corporations that make enormous profits from wounding the earth, and then use those profits to purchase elections and to fund fake science. These students know that there's no real debate about the fact and urgency of human-caused climate change because they get their news from John Oliver, which I'll let you get also for a second.
Last Week Tonight presents a statistically representative climate change debate.
Good evening. Joining me tonight, a climate change denier and, naturally, Bill Nye Science guy.
Bill? John?
Yep.
Causing climate change? No question.
Wait. Before we begin, in the interest of mathematical balance, I'm going to bring out two people who agree with you, climate skeptic, and Bill Nye, I'm also going to bring out 96 other scientists. It's a little unwieldy, but this is the only way you can actually have a representative discussion. So, yeah, please file in. Again, this is going to make the debate difficult. We shouldn't really be having it in the first place, but...
trouble again getting it to go forward. Let's see what works. There, that works. So this is the Anthropocene age. My question then is, does theological education matter if the world is coming to an end? I think the question is more useful than anything I can say in response, but I'll share some initial thoughts. Number one, I think we need to grapple with the role of religion in stifling climate action. And more specifically, the tremendous influence that Christian communities have in shutting down public discourse around climate change in America. Over the summer, I was chatting with an acquaintance who wanted me to understand that his resistance to doing anything about climate change wasn't that he doubted the science. He just believes that God has a plan. Either the second coming of Christ is upon us, or, he asserted, God won't allow us to destroy ourselves. Since he's a faithful Catholic, I tried, citing Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si, and its clear charge to take care of our common home in peril, to acknowledge the human roots of the crisis, to recognize abuse of creation as ecological sin, and the way it's wrapped up with other ways of extracting and extorting from Earth and each other. It turns out he's not such a popey Catholic, so that didn't work. I don't think I meant to extend it yet. So white evangelical Christians and white Catholics in the US are the most resistant to accepting climate science. One reason is that 58% of white evangelicals believe that Jesus is coming back by 2050. And the worse the world gets, the more it seems to align in their imagination with the book of Revelation, which someone called the inescapable source book for Western anxiety about the end of the world. So in an unholy alliance with the fossil fuel industry, the religious right has helped to take the Republican Party hostage. This is a party that created Yellowstone National Park under President Grant, the first national forest preserves under Benjamin Harrison, the EPA under Richard Nixon, and who also, by the way, signed major environmental legislation like the Endangered Species Act. And even as recently as George H.W. Bush, Republicans pushed to stem acid rain. and now they're not interested in any of those things. We shouldn't ignore, of course, the internal diversity within evangelical and Catholic Christianities, and certainly within broader groups and communities of Christianity. In communities of color, for instance, they've seen how the poor are the first and the worst to suffer the effects of climate change, and they're not as sanguine about apocalypse. Already, climate is a substantial factor driving the global refugee crisis, in turn also, of course, driving a convulsive wave of nationalism. But we still have to ask, what is the role of eschatology in dulling our political will for change? Christianity is not alone in eschatological expectation. Other surveys, so 65 to 85% of Muslims in Turkey, Iraq, and Afghanistan, for example, believe the Mahdi, the equivalent of the Messiah, will come in their lifetime. Multiple life stances have conjured visions of the end with their own versions of upheaval and cataclysm that could rationalize our own inaction as it comes upon us. And what is the role of theism in general, with assertions that God's in charge of history? Does that, as my acquaintance thought, let us off the hook? Every religious tradition I know anything about can be interpreted in ways that foster complacency on climate change. Detachment in Buddhism. It could be imagined as a lack of concern for the created world, but I learned it as a commitment to do what's right without investment in the outcome. Observance of halakha in Jewish tradition can mistakenly be reduced to ritual meticulousness, even though ritual is supposed to be how wholly bound up with the ethical. Moksha in Jain or Hindu traditions, it can be seen as concern only for the fate of one's own soul, but there are endless numbers of teachings in these traditions that connect the fate of your soul with your work to ease the suffering of others and to seek collective liberation. We have to see the dangers embedded in our traditions, however, if we're going to address them. We need to excavate our traditions to reimagine our relationship with creation. So, diverse life stances have helped to shape an exploitative human relationship with the natural world. Religion didn't invent it, but it justifies it. Think about the way many people understand the verse in Genesis. Fill the earth and master it. It's not merely conservative Christianity, but all our institutions that have been co-opted by fossil-fueled fantasies, assuming that we can take out from the earth and from each other whatever we have the power to do. And yet there have always been religious voices that offered alternatives to the politics of fear and greed, colonization and extraction. During the Seder, I shared some Jewish examples, but there are insights to be gathered from multiple life stances that challenge this domination paradigm. We need to excavate our traditions, teach them. Remember from the Seder, this 10th century midrash that teaches the whole world, humans, animals, fish, birds, we all depend on one another. We all share the same destiny. What happens to one will ultimately happen to us all. And the medieval biblical commentary that affirmed that we are made of the same stuff as the ass and the mule, the cabbage and the pomegranate, and even the lifeless stone. And that was before we did the whole genome thing. But of course, we knew these things even long before the Middle Ages. In the book of Job, one way to read God's response to Job at the end, where were you when I laid the earth's foundations? Have you ever commanded the day to break? Do you give the horse its strength? Does the eagle soar at your command? Is to challenge the idea of humans as the naturally dominant species with our anthropocentric view of the universe. I think we also need to resist more robustly and effectively our hyper-individualized society and reinstill communitarian values. Communitarian values, they make us more resilient, capable of adapting to the world we need to fashion in order to prevent catastrophe, capable of thriving in a world that's going to be different than the one we know, capable of planning for and living with that uncertainty. Succumbing to despair is, I believe, a moral failure. Abdicating responsibility for those who live on the planet with us. When Stevenson titled his most recent book on climate justice, "What we're fighting for now is each other." But that's not how everyone thinks about it. Those of you who are really old, meaning older than me, may remember a Pogo cartoon where the mouse warns, if you're starving with a tiger, the tiger starves last. There are plenty of people who plan for catastrophe by figuring out how to be the tiger. Survivalists talk about it as the end of the world as we know it. If you Google the acronym, you'll get a host of prepper sites, most of which talk about stockpiling food and water and weapons and tools and medicines in order to be among the few who will survive. Of course, those with money and power start with a leg up. Last August, there was a front-page story in the New York Times about survival condos built into former missile silos. Survivalists were at it long before climate change was on the radar, but a number of them now do count climate catastrophe among the potential catalysts for the end of the world as we know it. And even the sites that recognize you can't make it alone still play on the human instinct to compete for survival. Yet people who actually study the potential dissolution of the world as we know it say that we will be dependent on each other in ways we can't now even imagine. In the face of all this, I think in theological education, we also have to be more thoughtful about cultivating resources for hope. The primary messaging strategy for climate action is to show the urgency of the matter. Let's make it better or else. But social scientists have demonstrated that if you tell people something has to be done or we're all going to die, most people actually opt for door number 2, however strange that seems. Overwhelming fear leads people to give up or disengage. The prophet Isaiah knew this. The book relates how God called the Israelites to change their ways or else, right, in order to avert catastrophe. But instead, they succumbed to the temptations of fatalism. Eat and drink, for tomorrow we're going to die. Succumbing to what Catherine Keller calls a critically plausible nihilism, and others have called futilitarianism, leads us to the same place as reactionary denialism. I can't do anything about it, or it's too late, gives into the culture of consumption and distraction just as readily as it's not happening. It doesn't have anything to do with human beings. Now, our reservoirs of hope may be technological, political, religious, artistic, or something else, but they are essential for us to have the resilience to take action. We have to believe that it's possible to forestall some of the worst effects of climate change by aggressively pursuing renewable energy sources, developing carbon capture technologies. This is going to be annoying. There we go. Expanding desalination. This is weird. This is so weird, the way it's doing it. Okay, you're going to get it in the long form. Other means of sustaining water supplies, changing the human diet, seeking economic equity, acknowledging that there are limits to what can be extracted from the earth and from other human beings, learning to treasure the glorious beauty in the created world, teaching simplicity and solidarity, and modeling compassion. That's how you study for exams, too. You go back to the beginning each time and later on. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs teaches that optimism and hope aren't the same thing. Optimism is the belief that the world's changing for the better. Hope is the belief that together we can make the world better. A belief that requires action and also action that requires belief. Star Wars fans may remember a scene from The Empire Strikes Back when Luke Skywalker is trying to raise his spaceship out of the muck with his mind. He's gotten pretty good at levitating blocks and that kind of stuff, but he can't seem to sustain the lift on this heavy object. And when he gives up and walks away, his mentor Yoda, not baby Yoda, but Yoda, does it in his stead. And Luke comes back and says, I can't believe it. And Yoda responds in his sad, wise way, that is why you fail. Hope. Radical hope that reckons with the threat is an essential feature of theological education in the Anthropocene age. Hope requires meaning-making, what Viktor Frankl described as the most fundamental drive of humanity. There's a study of children about how they best cope with the climate crisis. So what works, it turns out, is a combination of problem-solving and meaning-making. Because if you just do problem-solving, it ultimately has a negative effect on the children's sense of well-being. It needs meaning-making too. In Deep Adaptation, professor of sustainability leadership, Jem Bendel, defines resilience as a meaning-making exercise, discerning what is it that has the most value for us. This is what we can't do without. But he also writes about the need then to relinquish those things that we can do without, acknowledging ideas, habits, and things we're going to have to let go of. And restoration, how we can rediscover simple pleasures we've lost in the way we now live our lives. Cultivating hope also requires making room to process grief. I'm going to share examples from outside the world of theological education. After listening to students at the University of Washington, Professor Jennifer Atkinson offered a seminar called Environmental Grief and Climate Anxiety. Every seat in the course was full. Then the Seattle Times ran a story about it. Readers responded with letters of support and, of course, a surfeit of ridicule. One letter asked, do the students roll out nap mats and curl up in the fetal position with their blankies and pacifiers while listening to her lectures? Dr. Atkinson reflected on the irony that her students were accused of being snowflakes when those doing the accusing were basically in denial. She argued that facing the hard truths of our climate crisis ultimately stakes steady courage and a certain amount of grit. The Good Grief Network, there she is, by the way, and the Good Grief Network developed a 10-step program to process collective grief around racism, mass shootings, and climate change, the climate crisis. Step 1, accept the problem and its severity. Step 2, acknowledge my part. Step 3, sit with uncertainty. Step 7, by the way, take breaks, it's different than giving in to permanent distraction, right? It's more like Anna Lamott's teaching that everything will work again if you just unplug it for a few minutes, and that includes us. It's not a paradigm-shattering list, that's not the point. But it creates community to gather around. It creates opportunities to think more deeply. Acknowledge my part, for instance, should prompt us to think about moral injury outside the confines of military service. Students are starting to investigate what their complicity, as they continue to drive cars, fly on airplanes, eat beef, turn up the AC, worry about their popularity more than the planet. What is the cost to our sense of self as we do these things? So these are things that theological education is actually pretty good at. Fostering self-critical faith, reinterpreting traditions, countering cultural trends, cultivating hope, making meaning, processing grief, if we will take on the climate crisis with seriousness. Does theological education matter if the world is coming to an end? Perhaps more than ever. So what I'd like to ask you to do, because I don't want to leave it just on that note, is to talk together at table about this. On a scale of 1 to 10, how much currently does the climate crisis factor in how you think about the future, your future? Just try to quantify it first. And then for a few minutes, we'll take 10 minutes total, and then we're going to go eat. But how do you respond? At whatever level where you are, how does it impact you emotionally, politically, socially, theologically, some other kind of lee, and ask you just to talk together at table for a bit. Okay? finish your sentence, if you would. You're going to be up. Sorry. David thought this might be a lovely song on which to close our conversation. I hope this isn't the end of the conversation. Thank you for engaging in it and re-inspiring some of our collective energy around these questions. The floor is yours. Then there's a blessing. This one usually goes after the meal, but because it's going to go to our recessional song to the same tune, this is the shortest. If you're in a hurry, this is the shortest blessing after the meal. Those of you who may have celebrated Shabbat with me may know that the blessing after the meal, after you're not hungry anymore, can usually go on for a very long time. But if you're in a hurry, this is the shortest version. It was interpreted by Shefa Gold with these words in English. So you'll catch it, and then after we're done thanking God for the food we're about to eat, which, by the way, is vegetarian, not vegan, but vegetarian, and there's some gluten-free, and it's from Justice of the Pies. She's a wonderful youngish African-American entrepreneur trying to do good with her business. We'll rise, and faculty will recess, so we'll have a little taste of that convocation feel to the tune of Sanctuary.
tried and true. And with thanksgiving, I'll be a living sanctuary for you.
Faculty. Meet us next door.